Okay, we're going to look at another one on early life in the Americas, and I'll interject at periodic times through it. This is about life before the Clovis people. Portable rock art as evidence of pre-Ice Age humans in North America. In other words, what predates the Amerindians' interjection into North America, and we've all agreed on them coming across the northern ice bridge at the Bering Sea, which right there at the end would have had some way of cleft coming through, and they've figured that that shows up right at the same time as the first people come into the Americas. Now, I've showed recently, well, it's been almost a year ago now, that they have found earliest people in South America that actually are more genetically close to them than the peopling of North America, which showed you that was probably more influxes that came into it. But what was the difference? Well, they've been avoiding telling the difference, and a few recent finds show that the difference is there was also Proto-Indo-Europeans, pre-Proto-Indo-Europeans at the time, who had come over actually before them, and they have found a couple of sites now, and genetics have kept very well with them, and they seem to have come in before the idea of the Proto-Amerindians, which is 13,000 years ago or somewhere around there. Now, we've also talked about it in a lot of videos that there seems to have been the Great Catastrophe that happened at about this same time, and also all of the animals that were in America at the time, and the last of the dinosauric or prehistoric animals really died off rapidly. And it's said that it was tried to be correlated to the humans coming through and then running rampant, and that we just messed up the ecology so much that all of the mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and everything, we collapsed it to the point that there was the saber-toothed tiger didn't have anything to live off of with the thing and it all just fell apart. They tried to say this all the way through, and I was grown up with the idea, have seen a few video presentations on the idea and everything, and I remember somebody that I had gotten a book from about, I don't know, 82, 81, 82, and it was older than that by a few years, and but not real old, 5, 6, 8 years maybe at the most, and I don't remember the name of the author, but I actually still have the book over here in my library somewhere. And I think it's this only book that he came out with, and in his presentation he showed the very first like Salutrean type points that I had seen, and some other sickle type and countercut and convex blades that didn't look familiar, but then he showed that those were exactly as similar, and flint mapping techniques were similar to what was over in Europe, and from that way instead of the other way. And no one has really gotten behind this, but then the conspicuous people that we all think are behind us not being able to know it. There's a person working there, and he became famous, and I don't know if they've hung him in there for a reason or not, but he is the one that is proposing the Salutrean hypothesis the most, and it's a doctor, and I've done a video about that where it shows these two people have the collection that they have and how they do match to the Proto-Europeans that are even more towards Europe and Great Britain and things. It looks like they had come across from there, and also predating that, also predating the guys in Alaska that were the pre-Proto-Indo-Europeans that came into the Americas and that. But we're left to believe, we want to have this idea that we showed up and there was this innocent people and all this type stuff, but they were warring with each other and stuff, and we had a hard time making any pact that they would stick to in any way, shape, or form for any period of time and other things. But people say, well, you've got to understand that they were primitives. Well, that's what happened a lot through a lot of people, that we ran into. Most of the conflicts, though, that you find out that history talks about were people that are almost exactly at the same rate. And then there were things like, I don't know, whenever the Hyksos came into Egypt and they had compound bows and horses as opposed to donkeys and all those things, that really rapidly changed things. But and helped them a lot too to succeed for the other half of their tenure and stuff. But at the same time, uh, it seems that uh, nowadays, of course, there's great compassion and, oh, what have we done, type of thing. Well, we heralded mankind for everybody. And while we weren't that great at doing it ourselves, looking back on it, we did a pretty damn good job in realizing all the data that's in front of us. Everybody wants to point out all the bad things and stuff, but really that's all you want to focus on, especially if you're against the idea, or if you're jealous or something like that. So let's get into this a little bit. And what I wanted to tell you about that book, though, was the hypothesis, and one thing that stuck with me is that in showing like 3 or 4 pages of examples of arrowheads from different areas, he's talked about how there's different modes and methods, and these are more bow fronted and these are more real apex pointed, and the way the back's done, even the way that they attach. And you think of a common arrowhead, and I had one at this time, but it was silver and gold and had a little rope around it that was the latch on, that hung from your neck. I'm sure you probably remember those from back in the day, and they still kind of have them today. People don't use them as much, but and it was classic arrowhead, like on Kansas City Chiefs helmets or whatever, and classic arrowhead. But a lot of his variations were some other variation on a theme, but they were all small. They were literally 1.5 inches, 1 inches to maybe 2.5, 3 inches. You start getting some pretty big arrowheads, and you're looking at all that. And one commentary just he put in there, but didn't seem to focus on it very much, was the idea that none of these that we have found that we correlate to Clovis people are really giant and or big game defenders and or attackers in any way. And he didn't mention the idea of there being a comet that broke up in North American ice shelf that caused a great catastrophe that knocked everybody out, in Siberian mammoths and everything, but he hinted to an idea that they weren't there before they got here. It's like just after. And so we've looked at it, and was, they say, well, 11 to 13,000 years is when they came in. There's some first view and everything. Okay, great. 11 to 13,000, 10,500 BC, that's 12,500 years ago. So not too long after the Great Catastrophe, they came in. Well, the reason we have sites, and it's harder to find, that are dated older than that there was a great catastrophe up here, and there were people here before that, and most of them dwindled away to nothing from what had happened. And it didn't happen on a Thursday. It happened over a series of time, but it would have happened rapidly and killed off areas. As soon as it happened, of course, it would have killed off a large portion of up near Michigan and everything, and where it ran through, and then the after effects of that. But then making a nuclear winter and going back to the Younger Dryas and things, it really affected everybody and all over the planet too. And all these animals that weren't prepared, it was melting, and they were going farther and farther north. Like they say now, they found grizzly bears up in polar bear land, and polar bears coming down a little bit in the edge of it. Oh, well, all of a sudden, boom, cold again, and it would be like, wow, bap, that would knock them out real quick. Just, hey, out of range, out of season. Way up in the hills during a great blizzard that never ends. Not for any time short enough to anything to live through it. But these Siberian mammoths and stuff are like flash frozen. They have food in their mouth, food in their guts. Some of them have actually looked like they froze and got bent over almost. And things, they notice that it's a strange effect, and then they're literally just flash frozen. So this happened in a extremely rapid event. Let's get into this. The worship of carved stones date back to man's earliest evolution. A portable rock, human-made markings on movable natural or rock or stone. And I've shown videos about the Venus statuettes and things like that, and how they look like they're somewhat made natural and from natural forms and everything. This is a global phenomenon, and it's seen over here in the New World too in some forms. These Stone Age objects have been found in many regions of the world with similar motifs even. Some of the natural shape and properties of rocks were exploited to achieve the desired visual effects. That's a fancy way of saying, hey, it looks like a duck, and then they picked it up, scratched an eye on it, the air under the jaw, remade the wing a little better than the natural rock already had it, maybe even scratched a couple of feathers on it and go, it's a duck. But when we look at it, they only did this much to it. It really kind of looked like a duck at first. And bears and so on, if you follow me. Almost like you can see it in the clouds and all you had to do was finish it off. Somebody had done a sketch and then you finish it off. So, although this is difficult to date portable rock art, it does provide an important link in building a chronology of art and thus evolution of prehistoric man. Mainstream archaeology dismisses the validity of most portable rock art, especially in North America, and it's because they can't give a timing to it. As I've told you, until recently with genetics coming back out, we were starting to get stalemated, and it was really getting into these people getting nitpicky about certain types of pottery and certain things that were on pottery, and did they see their pottery, did they trade with those people, and all these things, and genetics answered the question. And now we've come up with a Proto-Indo-European hypothesis that a lot of people are not even aware of because they don't tout it unless you're in that class. It's amazing. You go back in school and they still refer to nothing about this, and it seems to be, we're so Christian in America and everything, they don't want to have anything go against, biblical concepts or anything, but try to get enough science into you to where you understand the world and I don't know. Anyhow, portable rock art does provide an important link, though, that can connect things. And North America has had this idealism for around 100 years now with this Clovis first concept, and it's actually staved off most but any work. The only thing that, short of a few mistakes and then people properly trying to go for such a thing, we never look past a depth that should be Clovis and see how long or if there is anything. They always said it's a waste of time, don't do it. But you do it, and then you find out, hey, here's something. At least it's worked stone and stuff. Oh, they try to dismiss it. Like pieces like this right here that you can plainly tell. This is a work stone, and it's that idea that you can see in Göbekli Tepe is where they find this. And people would say, I don't know, it looks like a cowling over of a cobra or something, but it's really just a mask with the hair going back. And almost like a bird mask, has a bird beak a little bit, but the nose seems to have been squared off slightly, and just a little slit lip that's down there, and then the eyes. So this looks a lot like the stuff that you see around the other sites near Göbekli Tepe that date to these ranges, and they have these tall idols. One of the ones they've seen has a blue eyes in him. He stands up real tall, and it's just like a effigy or a totem even type thing. It would have been one of the first effigies they would have probably give to ancient ancestor veneration and or in a god, and then trying to place the two together and give effigies to the stars and all these things and make attachments. But that's a miniature mask from Göbekli Tepe, and it's made from flint cortex, right? Jewel Jones, the curator of Rock Museum in New Brunswick, Canada, and the author of RockArtMuseum.com, has collected thousands of prehistoric portable rock art. I might do a video on that and do a vamp in it soon. Some of these carved rocks clearly depict pre-Ice Age archaic humans and animals. The depictions of cave lions, short-faced bears, elephants, and monkeys belong to an extinct group of 90-plus genera of gigantic animals. Most of them roamed North America and Europe for millions of years prior to that megafauna extinction event in 13,000 to 11,000 years ago, and most of them still existed in the old world, but over here in America they were all died off, and it's the only reason we don't have the difference. Sure, both have wolves and all these things, and people understand they can migrate over it. Well, if they can do it, people can do it, and we've proven that and everything. Well, they could do it in the past, but how long ago could they have done it? Nobody wants to believe it goes past that to be a political correct type of thing and stuff. We're also having trouble because we found a lot of ancient burials, and it seems to predate any Indians that would have been in the area. But because it may be one of the Amerindians' ancestor, we're not supposed to look into it, and it would be destroying the burial or whatever. And we've got this whole thing that we wrote up and did to protect them from such. But at the same time, a lot of these things have been seen to be very, very old. And one of the ones for sure is this weird pattern that's fabric and reed bundles and all this stuff that's in this one burial that's in between, I think it's New Mexico and Vegas, that had light hair and everything, and they could see it with it, but they wanted to get permission. Whenever they went to get permission, they cut everything off. They wouldn't let them do anything, and all they have is this one bad picture, and somebody drew a sketch art of it and piece of the little fabric, but then they're not supposed to go into it at all, and everything has been stagnated. And they went to court, and it's been in court for like 20 years, and if I'm not mistaken, nobody ever heard about it, but though they just told them no. And although whenever they dated the fabric, it dated like 16,000 years old, so it's like, well, that predates any Amerindians and any migration it would have been. People act like it's an Amerindian and it's one big, totem thing, but Apaches are different than Arapaho. These are different people, and they migrated different areas and things. So if you found some Apache thing way off in somebody else's land, you would have to ask the people of that land, tell the Apaches about it, and say, we're going to check out this and everything, and they'd all have to agree to it. But at the same time, if you find something and you go, hey, we were over here in this land, and it seems like we have something that's way back in the mammoth times and stuff, and some bones. Can we take a look at that? And hey, if it's your ancestor, then we'll put a little marker next to it. If so, no touchy, even put a little thing around it. Part of the U.S. government will do that for you, so you know your own heritage. It would be good, but things aren't looked as a handshake. It's always white man bad. So you don't get too much of that can happen, So pictures of elephants and mammoths, and then what appears to be the other form that's here, and so woolly mammoths, and then you have a mastodon that's showing up, and a few of these arts too, and so it gives a connection and a connective thought on what people are doing. And it would be cool for the history of humanity for guys to figure out where and when and what, but there's a stavement on that because it's already ruining the whole little narrative we've had for 100 years, and some people don't like to do that. I'm a stickler for change too. Once I get something set, you're going to have to show me something that's not set. But once I find data that totally sets it off, that's fine. One of the things I've shown you in a lot of my videos in the last few years here is older than previously thought. I'm not sure, but you might be able to go back and check it out, and I'm sure over 100 times easily I've older than previously thought, because I don't know, what I was taught growing up the 60s and 70s, 80s, and going to college and things was that short before 4,000 years ago, like the Bible, everybody was Ugg pretty much, and we were trying to come up out of that. And you can see what we know now, just a radical change in the difference of that and how long it goes back. And I'm trying to find the point of Ugg and where it radically changes at, and what could have possibly happened right there to last change it. It seems like there was a change in my mind, just to digress, at not this last ice age, but the ice age before that, and coming through Homo erectus and things, and radical change with Homo erectus forming different changes in each other, and due to a cross inbreeding with those, ending up with something like these couple of dogs got together and unit with this one breed, right, and everything, and wow, all of a sudden it's a Shetland sheepdog. This damn thing's smart as hell going on, right? And a Shetland sheepdog's got like one blue eye, okay, so go with that little jokey idea on the idea, but hey, it's got this thing going on, right? And bam, that makes it through cultures and becomes something more modern. And you can see that in Australian sheepdogs, and you can see that in huskies and all these type of things, to where it came across and through. And we're seeing genetics that work like that. A lot of times we're hindered from things like that, and genetics only gets, rarely do you get anything out of anything that's around this age that we're talking about. Anyhow, you're lucky if you do. But lost artifacts of Clover Hollow, definite proof of an ancient civilization or just a pile of rocks, because it's been dated at a deal that would put it at some 20,000 years ago, I think. And then they call it a pile of rocks. And it's like, well, why? Because that's 7,000 years earlier than you were willing to give anybody in North America. What Neolithic rock art can show us and our ancestors lived 6,000 years ago, which is one where I'll get into, I'm sure. I may make a video about it. Land or sea, heated debate of peopling of the Americas continues, because there could have been by sea. And I've shown you there's been a big deviation, and earlier than previously thought, one special one, I'm sure, for you, but I've known a lot different, and then still got shown even more, is boating and possible boating of the world. One guy, I remember whenever they Thor Heyerdahl and everything else, and he was like, somebody got to Australia and they tried to put it off and say, well, they float on a raft of crap or did this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, all these different people doing it and everything, it shows up that, hey, okay, well, we'll call it Seaworthy Raft then. You go with that. Hey, I'm going to build one of those things that looks like one of those older boats that you said nobody ever did anything with, and wham, here I go. And he went out to Easter Island, and he went to South America too, just like the ancient Phoenicians had supposed to have done, and so on, and showed it totally could happen in a Sumerian reed boat, like an Egyptian reed boat. And so here are some scratched up rocks with art and everything, almost a 5 on a dice pattern here, and crosshatches, almost scribble writing. And even though it's eroded and eaten into it, it almost looked like that original scratch writing. If you've looked at my video on Kamyana Mohila, and they talk about first linear writing that they have with scratches and lines, at certain lines meant a vocal sound, and that they'd figured out because they were just simplistic words and things. And a lot of it goes along with ancient Sumerians and stuff. But rocks that are just smoothed off, but then this thing that looks like it has LM written on it here, really. And the dating on this is extremely old and found in depths usually where they say no one ever existed, but there's art that's here on it, and it's a cross, and linear type writing too on rocks, and linear scratch writing here, like on those ancient sticks and stuff that they carried that had a lot of writing on it that date well over 30 something thousand years ago. And so it appears they were using that type of writing back then, but whenever they date it, they just go, oh, that's something newer or whatever, and just it's just kind of left out. Why haven't pre-ice age hominin remains been discovered in North America? Well, they're not looking. Mainstream science acknowledges that animals crossed the Bering Strait from Siberia to North America for millions of years, back and forth even. Prehistoric man has always migrated following food sources. It's only logical that hominins also crossed over during the last 2 million years, but then they say no. And we know that the woolly mammoth did and everything else, but recently I did a video on camels, and where did camels come from? Well, amazingly, they're figuring, well, it looks like, everybody would think they come from Egypt. No, they came from Bactria. That's where they get the name from and stuff. So it's right there above India. And it's like, no, that's where they domesticated and changed them into dromedaries and different types. And that shows early domestication of animals like horses. And where did they come from? They came across the bridge from North America. And North Americas don't exist anymore. South America had some still extant though, but it really was the vacuna and the llama type, that's there and stuff. But horses got reintroduced into America, and I've done another video on it. Pre-Ice Age hominin remains haven't yet been discovered in North America, and according to the Smithsonian, though. However, this does not mean that they don't exist. Neanderthal bones were first discovered in Belgium in 1829, and using the latest scientific advances, Neanderthal DNA has been found in deep excavations in Eurasia, where no bones were found. Denisovan bones were first discovered in Siberia in 2008. Denisovans were physically much larger than Neanderthals and modern humans. Though, in fact, everything was a little bigger back then. Cro-Magnon was even larger or whatever, but Denisovans attached to people that are attached to Australian Aborigines and some of the islanders, and what's extant in the dark-skinned people of India. And same thing with Fiji and stuff, so you can kind of see that blend that grows through there all the way into the Micronesian islands in the Mu area and so on. Uh, Even with over 1,000 reports of giant skeletons in the USA, the Smithsonian denies any knowledge of these skeletons, and there's even some bones and pictures been shown, but most of it they just write off as some type of fakes. The recent discovery of 130,000-year-old mastodon bones that were clearly hunted by hominins and have the scratch marks and carvings on them was acknowledged by the Smithsonian, but only as a remote possibility, and that there could have been some other animal at that time that really scratching and rubbing at it might have made similar marks that easily we could tell look like they had been carved at, you know. So there's only a couple of animals that could do that type of work. It was acknowledged by the Smithsonian, though, and so we're slowly but surely going to come out of this fog, and I'm trying to help blow away some of that mist here, and a veil that keeps us from the knowledge of just our recent past. The nearly 100-year-old Clovis first hypothesis is still the predominant mainstream belief. It's going to be taught to your kids in school and so on, and probably not even mentioned whenever they go through that there has been some remains found before then, and it's possible that people came in before that. On to the next page, class. Not even going to throw that in there, not going to throw it out, and it should be thrown out when it's acknowledged by science. But one day whenever they have all digital textbooks, they'll be able to add in and do things like that. But also you worry by then what the narrative will be that they will only speak about and not speak about in situations like that. It becomes a problem with what should be known and what and all these things, and about the past. Well, that doesn't need to be known, and all these things like they make the choices, and then you might take some graduate classes and then find out that it's not at all what you've been taught at first. It was kind of that way for me, definitely, from what you're taught through school, through grade age, and then you go into college and you start specializing in it, and you're like, well, that's quite different, and then you find out more, and of course, during that time, they were releasing more and more information, and some of this was 10, 15, 20 years old, and I didn't hear any of it. Didn't hear of any of it from school or anything. 50, 60 years old? No, I didn't hear any of it. Oh, I heard about that, but somebody said that was fake. Well, that's not fake. Oh, wow. Okay, so it's totally different. All right, and so here I am, 40 years later, and nobody still knows that crap. And it's like, well, wasn't it confirmed? And it was something 60 years ago even in first place? But, well, it's hard to write all the textbooks, and it's like, the last 12 times you wrote that textbook, it hadn't been in there. Why is that? I can't understand it. Except for it's a special narrative that you want to have going on, seems like. The Smithsonian acknowledges that archaic humans populated numerous locations around the globe approximately 2 million years ago, but this wouldn't have been the modern type of humans, not a Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens, now oldest form that we found, is in Jebel Irhoud, northern Morocco, at 315,000 years ago, and it does show the regression where those people had come out and into Eurasia and then mixed with Neanderthals, and then there's an influx back in and out a few times through all of North Africa and stuff, even down all the way to the Cape too, with the Hofmeyr site at 40,000 BC, and Blombos Rock with a red ochre burial setup, or red ochre symbolic setup that's there. Homo erectus was never extinct, but evolved a more human species, this guy mentions, just a side note. Homo neanderthalensis populated Eurasia 600,000 to 25,000 years ago, and whenever I was younger, it was a farther back number and everything, and now we've gotten Cro-Magnon figured out. One thing about it, we've got the genetics out of like 28,600-year-old Cro-Magnon, and it shows that his haplogroup and alleles are still extant today. That's modern human. That's really just us, not even the ancient haplogroups lead to hot haplogroups, which Homo sapiens is modern human. It's not proto-human in any way. That goes back to Erectus and so on that led into us. But so Neanderthals migrated between Western and Eastern Eurasia, interbreeding with archaic and modern humans. But they're showing that there's a link across this ice bridge that goes here, but there's also a link that you can't tell that goes from here to here, and you can barely see the dot there and here to here. And the length from here to here, whenever the ice goes down, is no bigger than any link of the lengths that make itself around the other edge. It's only we think, well, if it's melted at that point, it couldn't be solid ice. If you went around the edge of the ice pack, you'd have to pretty much do it with boats, and people didn't have boats. Well, now we're showing that there's boats that date way, way back then, and if you figure somebody showed up in Australia at 50,000 years ago, you're going to have to give them some type of floating device that could have made this journey. But let's just continue. And that's hominid evolution. Y'all can pause it to take a good look at it and everything and its differences. Dangers of studying pre-Clovis sites, though. American archaeologists are concerned they are being prevented from studying ancient remains that cannot be traced to any Native American historic tribe. A growing number of researchers are contradicting the establishment's refusal to look at and fairly evaluate the mounting evidence for earlier hominids in North America. North American archaeologists can literally put their careers in jeopardy to try to excavate or research a pre-Clovis or glacial period site. Oldest weapons ever discovered in North America are pre-Clovis date. I'm sure that's having to do with Salutreans and so on. Salutreans have these huge blades, 6, 8, 9, and they're big and everything, and they're made for hunting bigger animals and giant seals and things like that. It's not deer and smaller animals. And if you were fighting this cave bears and all these things, you may start off like that, but due to massive failures, you would come up with bigger blades and things to be able to do it with. You don't want to be very close to them. You want big spear, big blade, long, big puncture. Not, you don't want a 22 rifle. You want something that's got some pop to it. A lot of other things, and so you are going to have something along that. Great American Origins debate, Clovis or pre-Clovis. Indiana Jones, 1 million artifact collection, has got her in a spot. Why pre-Clovis is ignored. One of the possible reasons for the suppression of portable rock art, therefore the origins of man, is that it would inevitably lead us to more unwanted focus on the recent past. As a result, too many embarrassing discussions would end up being rehashed about man's inhumanity man and white man bad, sanctioned by our governments and churches during the last 500 years of European global colonization. And we're supposed to be very, very disappointed with ourselves that we brought humanity to the world, that we should have all just left them alone and everything and left them staying primitives. Or they just don't like the way that we did it and whatever. And couldn't you imagine that no matter what the way the world ended up, there would have been somebody that did it? And at least it's just Caucasian Americans. We've got it figured out and around. We're trying to help everybody out. We're sharing with the entire world. We can fly now. We went to space. We've got advanced medicines. And if you think this is cool, in 50 years when we'll be looking back and you're like, remember when we started cell phones and then we had that advanced medicines? Look at this, and so it's going to definitely go from there. But anyhow, guys, like, share, and subscribe. And again, I'm going to mention, and he mentions it too, one of the most common threads in archaeology today is much older than previously thought. And there are a lot of artifacts that have been found that just get looked over, that get dismissed, and a lot of knowledge. I've showed you a lot of videos about them. One is the one at Calico dig site in California, and down in the southern desert there, very much a Star Wars looking area. In fact, they filmed part of it there and so on, but the better part of it in Tunisia. Anyhow, in the video there, it shows them go down to 200,000 BC, and they have some type of hominid in the North Americas that are breaking rock and getting sharp points for use in carving and eating on bones and things like that. And they've got it right there in the strata. And then they did a test pit, and they find it again. And in fact, they found better examples of it in the test pit. And it's down like 70 foot deep. And we never, oh, you don't go about 5 or 6 foot deep, then you're past Clovis and you're just digging to China. Well, one lucky thing, if you watch my one on the Geralt site just here in central Texas, is up on a little crest hill that they've got that it goes back to like 16 and 18,000 years ago. And supposedly it was all from a mistake too. They just to let people for a couple of bucks go out there and try to dig up, and you can dig whatever you want to for hours and stuff. And they had made a pit, so they had already gone down quite a few feet. And they told people you always dig 5 or 6 feet, and that's it. So they dug 5 or 6 feet, but that's actually 12 or 14 now because they had done in this pit, and people were thinking, well, you got to dig in the pit as opposed to up on the land. Guess what? They run into these, oh, well, look here, I got a big arrowhead. Oh, look, I got this, and this looks different than those. Yeah, and sites show up there that's showing somebody that, well, and I don't know who you're going to date it to, but you pretty much shot yourself in the foot on the Amerindian situation already with the Clovis and its exact dating. So automatically it's somebody else, automatically it's white people. No, but that other influx shows that. And then if you look at the peopling in the Amerindians that there used to be, it's not just the people on the nickel, which that guy's got a big hooked Roman nose. There are mixtures between that are about, seems like some of them show, especially the eastern seaboard, to have about 1/3 genetics that lead to old genetics, like X and things like that should only show up here and over there. Yeah, things that aren't Xing anymore, but definitely were at one time. Anyhow, guys, more coffee, so like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. Peace.